What if fire didn't come to destroy, but to reveal? That night, when everything seemed gray and formless, I saw embers emerge from the ashes of my heights, small, timid, but alive, like a whisper from God, asking for space in my heart. The heat that touched my face didn't burn to punish, it called, and, in an instant, I realized, this story isn't just mine. Have you ever been there? Those moments when life presents you with a spiritual warning, almost silent, that demands humility before any response. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you. When pride falls, grace finds a way. The dream's setting was simple: silence, a ground covered in ash, and, in the middle, a handful of embers, as if mercy had waited patiently beneath my self-sufficiency. The flames of humility didn't appear as a spectacle. They emerged as spiritual discernment. I approached not out of courage, but out of necessity, and understood that those embers were an invitation to conversion, a call to hear prophetic messages that come not in shouts, but in signs. Dreams and visions of spiritual warning received by ordinary people often seem like this: discreet, insistent, true. And, in that moment, each spark seemed to translate a sentence from heaven. Your strength protected you from pain, but also closed you to love. I saw that redemption doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with a small yes offered in the dark. The ember teaches that humility is not weakness, it is the space where God breathes. That fire revealed cracks in my speech, hidden intentions, in my devotion, and a silent desire to win arguments more than to conquer myself. And when the light touched these edges, I felt I was being seen with truth and tenderness. Pride burned away and something new was born. It was as if heaven were saying, if you let me, I will light it. The language is simple: repentance that does not humiliate, prayer that does not show off, charity that does not calculate. And there, in the heart of that dream of redemption, I began to understand that true faith is not afraid of the mirror. As I watched, I realized that the embers didn't demand theories, they demanded surrender. Spiritual discernment happens when we accept that not all fire destroys. Some ignite what needs to die, so that what is eternal may breathe. This kind of vision, so common and yet so ignored, is a prophetic message that calls us to reorder priorities: more silence than spectacle, more listening than speaking, more presence than appearance. What you'll discover now may surprise you. When humility enters, the heart reads its own story differently, and prayer ceases to be a monologue and becomes an encounter. Perhaps as I speak, you're recognizing your own ashes: a delayed apology, a conversation you avoided, a gesture of service you put off. If something sparked there, don't fight the light. Stay with me until the end, because today we won't be collecting pretty phrases. We'll learn to gently fan what God has already placed within. And if you feel that these embers are also a message for your journey, take a deep breath. Now that pride has given way, it's time to bring your hands together, acknowledge the warmth, and listen carefully to what the ember has to say, step by step, unhurriedly, at the precise pace at which grace likes to work. If while I'm speaking, some ember has also been ignited in your heart, I'd like to hear it. I really do. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most to memory. A simple prayer, a small decision you feel you need to make today. Reading what you've experienced helps not only me continue this path with greater clarity, but also others who come here seeking spiritual discernment and discover in your story confirmation of the prophetic messages their hearts have been whispering. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Each comment is like a breath of fresh air on the embers. Each shared word keeps the gentle fire burning in the community. If you can, like this video right now. It may seem like a small gesture, but your like says, quietly, that this conversation about humility, redemption, and God's silence must continue. And when you subscribe to the channel, you show me that you want to walk alongside these spiritual visions and warnings that speak to the daily lives of ordinary people like us. It's your silent yes that gives me the energy to prepare the next part. Record with more care, bring new reflections, and keep this space alive and welcoming for those who arrive tired but ready to begin again. So, if this touched you, comment below, like the video, and subscribe not out of obligation, but because it makes a difference. In the meantime, take a deep breath and stay with me. Now I want to bring your hands even closer to the heat of these embers, to perceive together what they continue to reveal, in due time, as humility paves the way. Before that night, my life was full of certainties. I felt in control, believing my strength and self-sufficiency were signs of maturity. But in truth, it was pride that drove me, even if disguised as determination. I talked more than I listened, defended my opinions as if the world depended on it, and when someone contradicted me, I steeled myself internally. There was no room for doubt, nor for the possibility that I might be wrong. And, over time, this attitude created invisible walls that separated me from others, from peace, and even from my own spiritual sensitivity. What I didn't realize is that this kind of hardness of heart doesn't just happen overnight. It builds slowly, brick by brick. With every forgiveness we refuse, every conversation we avoid, every time we put the need to be right above the desire to love. Maybe you're at that point now, surrounded by solid arguments, but far from any true reconciliation. It's easy to fool yourself into thinking this is strength, when in reality, it's a heavy armor that prevents the heart from breathing. I remember how my arguments were almost always driven by the drive to win, not to understand, and this need to prove something constantly left me exhausted. Inside, there was an emptiness I didn't want to acknowledge. Rigidity protected me from the pain of being vulnerable, but it also robbed me of the chance to experience deeper connections. The truth is, when we close ourselves off in our own pride, even prayer loses its power. It becomes a monologue in which we try to convince God of our version of things, instead of asking Him to show us His dot. And it was in this setting that the dream unfolded. It wasn't a grand vision, or one filled with complex symbols. It was simple, yet straightforward, a ground covered in ash, cold, inert, and, amidst that silence, a few live embers, small but resilient. The contrast was stark. The ashes represented exactly what I had become, a seemingly stable surface, yet lifeless, devoid of warmth. The embers, however, they were like a reminder that there was still something true there, hidden beneath so many layers of self-sufficiency. As I approached, I felt a different warmth. It wasn't the aggressive heat of a destructive fire. It was an inviting warmth, a warmth that begged me to lower myself, to make myself small, so I could perceive it up close. In that moment, I understood that the embers symbolized the grace that endures, even when everything external seems dead. Humility is the breath that revives what has been hidden, and this cannot be learned theoretically. It must be experienced. The most uncomfortable part of this dream was realizing how far I had strayed from simple yet powerful attitudes, serving without expecting recognition, listening without preparing a response, forgiving without demanding a formal apology. All these small renunciations, which had once been part of my faith, had been suffocated by the ashes of my own ego. It was as if God were showing me the backstage of my soul. On the outside, impeccable speech. On the inside, a nearly extinguished fire. And don't think that recognizing this was easy. The first reaction of those who live in pride is to justify themselves, to say that the world is just like that, or that people don't deserve so much patience. But the dream wouldn't let me escape this hidden truth. As long as I kept my heart hardened, I would be wasting what little spiritual life I had left. The invitation was clear, but not imperative. I needed to fan those embers with humility, or I would see the last of the heat disappear. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is where many people get lost precisely when they're closest to transformation. The journey of breaking pride and rekindling the inner flame requires conscious decisions, small but consistent changes, and, above all, a willingness to let God lead the way. It's not a quick process, and it's not always comfortable, but it's in this discomfort that true healing begins. Comment there. That makes sense to me. That night had a different weight. It wasn't a physical weight, but a dense atmosphere, as if the air carried something I couldn't name. In the dream, I was in an open field, but there was no wind, no birdsong, no sign of life. The ground, in almost metallic gray, seemed covered in a thick layer of cold ash, as if a fire had burned there long ago, leaving only a heavy silence, the kind that can be disturbing. I took a few steps and felt the fine dust crumble beneath my feet, rising into the air and settling again, slowly, like snow that had lost its color. It was then, amidst this desolate landscape, that my eyes caught a barely perceptible detail, a shy point of light, hidden beneath the gray dust. I approached and realized it wasn't just any light, but small, living embers, like hearts beating. In a secret rhythm, there were no towering flames, just that stubborn glow that resisted. And suddenly, a gentle breeze blew past. I don't know where it came from. There hadn't been any wind until then, and this breath made the embers breathe, taking on a more intense tone, as if to say, "We're here, we won't give up burning." The warmth I felt wasn't like that of a frightening campfire, but like the touch of a blanket in the cold. It was a warmth that didn't burn my skin, but seemed to penetrate straight into me, illuminating parts I'd locked away for years. The pulsing light of the embers drew me in, not out of curiosity alone, but by an inner calling. It was as if the entire space had been prepared for that moment when I would lean in to listen, even if there were no words, only a living silence, charged with meaning. The feeling was ambiguous. Part of me wanted to retreat, afraid of what that fire might reveal. Another part felt that if I didn't get closer, I would lose something that would never return. And this tension made me realize that spiritual life is often like this, a fine line between escape and surrender. There are times when we feel God is near, but pride, excuses, and self-sufficiency act like ashes, smothering what could reignite. As I bent down, the embers seemed to gain strength, not because of my gesture itself, but because of the simple fact that, by bending down, I was acknowledging that I didn't have all the answers. It's strange how, in the real world, we spend so much time holding our heads high, speaking out, defending ideas, and rarely realize that it's in the act of bowing literally and spiritually that we find clarity. In that moment, it occurred to me that perhaps true transformation begins not when the flame bursts forth, but when we accept that the embers, however small, are already enough to warm and guide us. I could feel a kind of vibration in the air, as if the silence had weight, but also purpose. It was a silence that didn't accuse, didn't pressure, but invited, as if to say, take your time, listen, feel, see what's here before it disappears. This invitation wasn't just to look at the fire, but to look at myself through it. And it moved me, because I realized there's a truth hidden in the little things. Sometimes the miracle isn't in a grand sign, but in the courage to approach what's fragile and recognize its strength. The curious thing is that, as I remained bent over, there were no direct answers, but a series of subtle insights that began to form, like pieces of a puzzle. Memories of conversations I hadn't truly listened to, moments when my pride got the better of me, decisions made to preserve my image rather than my peace. And, at the same time, a quiet hope emerged. If those embers held, perhaps I too could burn again differently without the fire of ego, but with the flame of humility. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the setting of this dream isn't just a pretty story. It's a map for understanding how grace manifests itself behind the scenes in our lives. This discreet light, this warmth that doesn't threaten but attracts, is a reminder that even amidst the ruins of our wrong choices, there's always something waiting for the right breath to revive it. And the most impressive thing is that this breath often doesn't come from outside, but arises when we make the decision to let our guard down and allow the truth to touch us. Right there. I'm on this journey too. The embers before me were not merely a detail of the dream. They carried a meaning so profound that it seemed to transcend the image itself. I knew, somehow, that I was standing before a living symbol. They were not glowing pieces of coal. They were the representation of grace that never fades, even when covered by the dense ashes of pride. This awareness struck me almost physically. I could feel in my body the hidden truth they revealed. No matter how far I had strayed, no matter how much my decisions had stifled the simplicity of my faith, there was something there, latent, waiting, only for the right breath to reignite it. The ashes covering the embers were thick, heavy, and I recognized them immediately. They were the perfect image of what my pride had become, a layer that on the outside seemed solid and protective, but in reality stifled any sign of spiritual life. These ashes represented the times I chose to be right instead of seeking reconciliation, the conversations I'd ended with slammed doors, and the opportunities to serve I dismissed as too small for me. And it's curious how, on the spiritual journey, it's often what seems to protect us that actually keeps us trapped. I thought I was shielding my heart from pain, but deep down, I was isolating it from what could transform it. Humility, I realized, there, is like a gentle wind. It's not enough to destroy, it's not enough to tear everything away completely. It comes to gradually displace the weight of these ashes, making room for the heat to breathe again. And it's precisely this breath that makes the difference. God doesn't extinguish the flame just because it's become small. He waits for the moment when, by our choice, we make room for the Holy Spirit to move. In the dream, I felt that each time I leaned in a little more, this wind became more noticeable, more constant, as if the very act of lowering myself was the trigger for him to act. As I watched, I noticed that the embers weren't burning violently. They weren't in a rush to become a blaze. And perhaps this was the most powerful lesson. Not all growth is immediate, and not all transformation needs a spectacle to be real. Sometimes, the most impactful thing is that which grows slowly, silently, behind the scenes, without attracting attention. This patience of the fire taught me that grace works at the exact pace of those willing to walk, even slowly, toward what is true. I thought about how many times I'd confused strength with haste. In my old mindset, change meant acting quickly, showing results, proving I was different. But there, before those embers, I understood that true change is silent and constant. It's like blowing gently, every day, until the heat spreads again. There's no need to control the time, because the ember doesn't need to be forced to burn. It just needs nothing to stop it from breathing. This image stuck with me, because it also revealed something about decisions. Often, we choose to remain in pride because it feels safer. But in practice, each such decision is another layer of ash, another weight that suffocates grace. The opposite is also true. Each time we choose humility in small, almost invisible gestures, it's as if a grain of ash is blown away by the wind, revealing a little more warmth, a little more light. The most transformative part of this revelation is realizing that the embers were already there before I even arrived. God had already placed this flame within me long ago. The spiritual life is not about creating something from nothing, but about protecting and cultivating what has already been given. Humility doesn't light a fire by itself. It simply removes what blocks the light from appearing, and, somehow, this brought me peace. It wasn't about achieving something I didn't have, but about letting go of what was killing what was already mine by grace. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this metaphor of the embers goes far beyond a pretty symbol. It's a mirror of how we approach our own faith journey and how we allow or don't allow God to work in areas we'd rather keep hidden. What I saw in the dream was a reminder that while pride builds walls, humility builds pathways. Comment there. That makes sense to me. As I continued to gaze at those embers, something began to happen that couldn't be explained solely by the dream itself. There was no sound, no literal words, but there was a clear, direct communication. Impossible to ignore. It was as if the very light emanating from the embers was transmitting something, not to my ears, but to my consciousness. I didn't need to hear a sentence formed to understand the message. It was being written directly within me, as if someone had found the key to a door I never knew existed. The first sensation was a warning, a gentle but firm weight, like a hand resting on the shoulder, silently saying, while pride covers, the heart does not breathe. And I knew exactly what that meant. Pride isn't just visible vanity. It's not just the behavior others notice and comment on. It's also silent, sophisticated, and hides within seemingly noble decisions that, deep down, are driven by self-protection and control. It's the refusal to ask for help because we believe it would diminish us. It's the impulse to judge quickly so as not to have to deal with the complexity of other people's flaws. It's the habit of hiding one's own vulnerability to maintain a clean surface. All of this is ash on the coals. And while these layers remain, the heart cannot breathe fully. This warning, however, did not come with condemnation. It did not bring the harshness that paralyzes, but rather a clarity that liberated. And soon, another sensation came along, this time imbued with tenderness, like a caress to the soul. Bend down and blow with humility. It was so simple and yet so profound. By bending down, I shortened the distance between myself and the source of heat. By blowing with humility, I participated in the process of rekindling what was alive but hidden. It was not a heroic act, not a grand gesture. It was a small, almost invisible movement, but full of spiritual significance. I realized then that this voice wasn't giving me an order, but rather an invitation to participate in my own healing, to stop waiting for something external to come and resolve what was extinguished, and to take on the role of cooperating with God's breath. It was as if the dream was telling me, I can rekindle the flame, but it's up to you to decide whether you'll allow the ashes to be swept away. And this made me think about how, on our journey, we so often expect automatic change, as if faith were a button that instantly turns on what was extinguished. But transformation doesn't happen without our participation. The wind of humility needs to find space to circulate. And this space doesn't arise by chance. It's created by conscious decisions. Forgiving when pride wants to retaliate, apologizing when the urge is to justify oneself, serving in silence when the ego craves applause. Each of these gestures is a breath that keeps the embers alive. There was something almost paradoxical about this experience. On the one hand, I felt the weight of personal responsibility, the recognition that many ashes had been placed there by my own hands. On the other, there was the lightness of knowing that I didn't need to light an entire bonfire at once. One puff at a time, one humble choice each day, was enough for grace to find space. And this somehow took the anxiety out of the process. It wasn't about rushing, it was about constancy. Gradually, I realized that this wordless voice wasn't just speaking to me about that moment in the dream, but about an entire mindset I would need to cultivate from now on. A mindset that understands that pride is a silent thief and that humility is the key to rekindling the soul. That even when everything seems hidden, there's always something breathing down there, waiting for the right moment to rekindle. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this warning and this tenderness together create a complete path. First, they show us where we're suffocating. Then they reveal to us how we can breathe again. And understanding this dynamic changes not only how we look at ourselves, but also how we relate to others and to God Himself. Right there, I'm on this journey too. When I woke up that morning, the dream still pulsed within me as if it had just happened. It wasn't just a memory of the images that stayed with me, but a persistent sensation, almost like a silent echo, reminding me that it had spiritual weight. And that's where something essential comes in: discernment. Because not every dream, no matter how vivid, carries a true message for our lives. We need to know how to test the spirit of what was shown, separating what comes from God from what might be the fruit of our emotions or even external influences that distort perception. The first criterion I learned to observe is the peace that calls for conversion. It's not a superficial peace, that comfortable feeling that merely confirms what we already wanted to hear. It's a peace that, paradoxically, disturbs, you knowing it comes from a safe place, but at the same time, it drives you to change, to move on from where you are, to leave behind what doesn't align with the truth you've just received. In the case of my dream, this peace confronted me. I knew I couldn't simply remember the embers and move on with life as if nothing had happened. Another fundamental point is the fruit of repentance. A genuine vision or dream doesn't just generate Momentary emotion. It provokes an internal movement that leads to concrete actions. If the experience doesn't change the way you act, if it doesn't inspire gestures of reconciliation, forgiveness, or a more sincere search for God, then it's just a pretty image in your memory. My Embers dream didn't leave me in the same place. I began to observe my conversations, my reactions, my justifications, and realized how often pride still dictated my stance. This kind of fruit is living proof that something real has been planted. And there's one test that can't be ignored: alignment with Scripture. No matter how impactful the experience, if it contradicts the clear principles of the Word, it's not from God. Authentic dreams and visions never create a shortcut that deviates from what has already been revealed. On the contrary, they reinforce, deepen, and update the practical application of biblical truths in our lives. My dream reminded me of texts that speak of brokenness, of God not despising a contrite heart, of the wind of the Spirit that blows where it wills. This gave me the confidence to trust what I had received. That's why I always insist, avoiding sensationalism is vital. It's not about turning the dream into a spectacle or seeking attention that feeds the spiritual ego. The focus needs to be on the inner transformation, on what the message provokes within. It's easy to fall into the temptation of recounting the experience in a way that impresses, that causes emotional impact. But if this doesn't lead to practice, it loses its purpose. And, in a way, pride can even infiltrate this when we want the story to exalt us more than it exalts God. Another truth I've learned is that dreams confirm, but do not replace, a life of prayer and study of the Word. They are like signs pointing to something greater, but they are not the final destination. A daily relationship with God, time dedicated to listening and meditating, is what provides depth and protection so that the message received is interpreted correctly. Without this foundation, even a genuine dream can be misinterpreted and led down paths far from the truth. Thinking about this, I realize that discernment is a skill that develops with practice and humility. One must be willing to submit one's own interpretation, to listen to others who have spiritual maturity, and to wait for confirmation in due time. Understanding isn't always immediate, and this is also part of the process. Patience is a powerful ally in avoiding hasty decisions based solely on the intensity of the experience. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding what to do with a true message is as important as recognizing it. There's a practical path that transforms dream symbolism into actions that definitively shape our journey. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The breaking of pride rarely happens in grand dramatic events. More often than not, it's built behind the scenes, in small decisions that seem insignificant to the outsider, but which, on the inside, carry the weight of a spiritual battle. It's as if each humble choice is a breath of air on the embers, pushing aside the ashes and allowing the heat to spread. These small renunciations are not gestures of weakness. They are clear signs that spiritual life is breathing again. One of the most powerful examples is the act of asking for forgiveness. Not the formal kind of forgiveness, said simply to close a matter, but sincere forgiveness, which acknowledges one's own failure without offering justification. This kind of attitude is like sweeping a handful of ashes from a coal fire suddenly. The light grows and the heat becomes noticeable. Listening before responding is another exercise that, first glance, seems simple, but requires enormous inner discipline. It means letting go of the rush to defend oneself and truly understanding what the other person is saying. Serving in silence, without seeking recognition or applause, is also effective training. When you help someone without anyone knowing, it's as if you strengthen your inner fire without exposing it to the winds of vanity. These actions, which I call voluntary it's not about degrading oneself, but about consciously choosing positions that remind us that we are not the center. It's offering your parking space to someone else even when you're in a hurry. It's giving the floor in a meeting. It's publicly acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. Small gestures, but when repeated, they reshape our mindset and change how we react to provocations and challenges. At first, these choices may seem uncomfortable, even painful. Your ego screams, argues, and tries to rationalize why it would be better to act differently. But over time, something shifts. You begin to perceive a different lightness, a freedom you hadn't felt before. The automatic reaction to defend yourself at any cost begins to lose its power. The need to win every argument gives way to a peace that doesn't depend on the immediate outcome. That's when you realize the ember is igniting, when silence is no longer a burden, but a safe space. When service is no longer a sacrifice, but a natural choice. When asking for forgiveness ceases to be humiliation and becomes liberation. The daily test to determine if this ember is truly alive is simple, yet profound. Observe how you react to small provocations. If you used to explode, and now you can breathe, and respond gently, even if you still feel discomfort inside, it means the fire is working. If pride previously prevented you from acknowledging a mistake, and now you can do so without much effort, the heat is spreading. And, most importantly, if you used to measure each gesture by the response you would receive, and now you can act without expecting anything in return, the flame has already begun to transform you within. These signs may seem subtle, but they have a huge impact on your spiritual journey. They show that the fire isn't just symbolic, it's reshaping your mindset, exchanging the drive of ego for the constancy of humility. And the most beautiful thing is that the more the flame grows, the more it warms other lives around you, without you having to force anything. The light that comes from this transformation is noticed by those around you, and often serves as an incentive for them to also begin to dispel their own ashes. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because breaking pride isn't just an individual process. It has a multiplier effect that reaches relationships, decisions, and even the way we see our life's purpose. Comment there. That makes sense to me. There is a battlefield that almost no one sees, but which defines the strength or fragility of our spiritual life. It is the invisible battle against internal resistance and self-deception. And the most dangerous part of this struggle is that, often, the enemy doesn't present himself openly. He disguises himself as virtue, dresses in the garb of sincerity, and even uses the language of faith to justify what, deep down, is pride. How many times have you heard or even said phrases like, "I'm like this, I just say it because I'm sincere," or "I only defend the truth"? This is where self-deception sets in, because we convince ourselves we're defending principles, when in fact, we're protecting our own ego. Another subtle trap is using faith as a weapon to win arguments. This is more common than it seems. Instead of applying scripture to illuminate understanding and heal wounds, we end up using verses as ammunition to prove ourselves right. The problem is that, in this process, the message ceases to be an instrument of transformation and becomes an argument to fuel vanity. It's a distorted use of truth, because, even if the words are correct, the spirit behind them is contaminated. The warning signs of this battle are clear to those willing to see them. Chronic impatience, for example, reveals that there's something within us that hasn't yet learned to rest in God's timing. The need to always have the last word shows that the priority isn't edification, but controlling the narrative. These symptoms don't appear all at once. They recur in the small interactions of everyday life, in a conversation with a friend, in a work meeting, in a family argument, and it's in these moments that we realize the ashes of pride are still there. Covering some of the embers. The strategy for dealing with this resistance needs to be simple but intentional. Breathing before responding is more than a self-control technique. It's a spiritual act. It's the time you give the voice of the Spirit to override the voice of impulse. Saying a brief prayer during this interval completely changes the atmosphere. It doesn't need to be elaborate. A simple "Lord, guide my words" is enough to shift the focus from your ego to the presence of God, and responding with gentleness, even when the provocation is intense, is a direct blow to pride. Gentleness is not weakness. It is strength that doesn't need to be proven, but it must be said. Winning this invisible battle is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing exercise. There are days when pride seems dormant and gentleness flows naturally. And there are others when any misplaced word reignites the old need to defend oneself. Therefore, it's not enough to simply recognize the traps. You need to develop a mindset of vigilance. This means paying attention not only to what you say, but to why you say it. It means asking yourself, before you speak, will what I'm about to say build or destroy? Will it kindle embers or scatter more ashes? Over time, this stance begins to yield silent revelations about ourselves. You begin to notice which triggers most awaken the need to assert yourself. You begin to realize that certain truths you so vehemently defend aren't so essential after a land, that often, giving up being right is a greater act of love than winning any debate. It's at this point that the invisible battle ceases to be just a fight against pride and becomes a journey of liberation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding how these internal resistances form and how feeds is the key to breaking cycles that seemed unbreakable and allowing the fire of humility to grow, unhindered. Right there, I'm on this journey too. There's a delicate moment in this journey of shattering pride that many get lost in, the moment when the light begins to expose what was hidden, and with it comes a nagging feeling of guilt. This is where we need discernment to understand the difference between paralyzing guilt and liberating compunction. Paralyzing guilt is like a wet weight on a coal. It suffocates, cools, and prevents any possibility of rekindling. It makes you fixate on the mistake, mentally replaying each failure, convincing yourself there's no way out. It's a kind of silent accusation that undermines hope and reinforces the ashes. Compunction, on the other hand, is completely different. It also brings pain, but it's a pain that pushes you forward. It's the tightness in your chest that comes with the desire to get up, to make amends, to start over. Compunction doesn't deny the gravity of the failure, but sees it as a starting point for real transformation. In my dream, the heat from the embers didn't come to crush me, but to convince me that there was life there and that this life could grow if I allowed it. In practice, this is the path of compunction. You look at what you've done, acknowledge it without apology. But instead of dwelling on the error, you decide to let it go and allow the breath of the Spirit to breathe new life into it. And this isn't just conceptual. It can be a daily exercise, simple but profoundly effective, that it works like this. Set aside 60 seconds, without distractions, just for this act. First, name the pride you identified that day, not generically, but specifically. Today at lunch, I didn't hear what so-and-so said because I was worried about formulating my response. Today, I refused help just to appear more capable. By naming, you bring pride out of the shadows and into the light. Then, surrender this burden to God, not with ready-made phrases, but with your own words, even if they are few. Finally, ask for the breath of the Spirit upon that specific area. Imagine, if you will, the ashes being dispelled and the ember gaining more heat. 60 seconds. It's enough to shift the internal atmosphere and make room for the gentle flame of humility to grow. The promise is clear. When the embers become a gentle flame, lightness and clarity emerge almost as a natural consequence. Lightness because the weight of self-deception falls. Clarity because you begin to see clearly what was previously distorted by pride. It's amazing how simple, conscious decisions, repeated day after day, reshape our mindset. That impulse to respond quickly begins to lose strength. The need to always maintain an intact image gives way to a deeper truth. That being shaped by God is worth more than preserving any facade. This healing that fire brings is not a noisy process. There are no announcements or applause. Often, it happens behind the scenes, when no one is watching, but it is precisely because it is silent that it is solid. It is the kind of change that does not depend on favorable circumstances to sustain itself. And, deep down, this is what differentiates those who live by appearances from those who live by essence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding how compunction shapes our daily decisions can reveal why some stay lit even in strong winds, while others go out at the first contrary breeze. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Over time, something curious begins to happen. The transformation, which was previously almost imperceptible, begins to leave visible traces. These aren't dramatic changes that everyone applauds, but subtle adjustments that, taken together, reveal a new pattern of life. It's as if the ember hidden beneath the ashes begins to emit more light and heat, affecting the surrounding environment without you needing to announce anything. Humility begins to manifest itself in concrete gestures, and the first sign of this is often unexpected reconciliations. People you haven't spoken to in a while, or who previously caused tension, begin to reappear in your life, and you find yourself ready to talk without carrying that defensive burden. It's not that all problems are resolved immediately, but your attitude changes. Instead of coming in to win, you come in to listen. This in itself breaks old cycles and opens space for new beginnings. It's a fruit that isn't produced by force, but by the patience of letting God work in your mindset. Another clear indicator is how you make decisions. Before, every choice seemed urgent, driven by the anxiety of resolving everything in your own time and way. Now, you begin to take a step back, consider the impact, and ask yourself if the answer you're about to give will build a positive impact or simply satisfy a momentary desire. This change in pace is a clear sign that pride is losing ground and humility is taking over. Less impulsive decisions are like solid bricks in a building that will stand the test of time, and perhaps one of the most valuable fruits is learning to listen more than you speak. It seems simple, but in practice, it's one of the biggest challenges for those accustomed to defending points of view intensely. When you realize you can remain silent, even with arguments ready, not out of fear or insecurity, but because you know that listening is more important at that moment, it's a sign that the embers are burning brightly. This shift in posture changes the atmosphere of any conversation and often diffuses even the most tense situations. These small victories deserve to be recognized because they are what sustain the journey. Perhaps one day you'll realize, today I silenced my ego and listened to the person until the end. Or, today, instead of arguing back, I chose to understand. These are seemingly simple moments, but they carry enormous spiritual weight. They show that you're not just avoiding the mistake, but building something new within yourself. And when this happens repeatedly, it begins to become a habit. A natural reflection of the new mindset being formed. A powerful resource for consolidating this process is spiritual journaling. Noting these changes, however small they may seem, is like keeping a diary of God's actions in your life. It doesn't have to be elaborate. A single sentence, a brief description of a moment when you acted differently, is enough. As you reread these records, you realize you're not going in circles. There's real progress, even if it's slow. This habit also strengthens your faith on days when you feel stagnant, because it proves that the embers are alive, even if the heat isn't as intense as you'd like at the moment. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when these new patterns take hold, they not only transform your life, but also begin to influence how you impact the people around you. creating an effect that goes far beyond what can be measured. Comment there. I'm on this journey to. There's something powerful about transforming a spiritual revelation into daily practice. It's as if each gesture is a step toward keeping alive the flame God lit. Therefore, after everything I experienced in that dream, I realized I needed a concrete way to bring the embers back into my daily life, to prevent the ashes from covering what had already been rekindled, and that's how, for me, what I call the Ember Ritual was born. It's not a set of fixed rules, but a simple, intentional path to keeping the heart sensitive, willing, and constantly transforming. The first step is a 2-minute silence. It may seem short, but the difference this time makes is immense. It's not a distracted silence, where the mind wanders to the day's tasks. It's an intentional silence, where I close my eyes and visualize the accumulated ashes. Sometimes they take shape, an unresolved argument, a worry I haven't let go of, a memory that still bothers me. Other times, they're just a diffused weight, that feeling of spiritual exhaustion. In that moment, I ask for God's breath. Not in a rush, not with elaborate words, but with the sincerity of someone who recognizes they can't rekindle the embers alone. It's impressive how, in just 2 minutes, the internal atmosphere changes, as if the air became lighter. The second step is to choose, that same day, a concrete act of humility. Not something grandiose, but a gesture that challenges the ego. It could be offering help without expecting thanks, asking for forgiveness for something pride would rather sweep under the rug, or even expressing sincere gratitude that has long been trapped. These acts work like removing ashes with your bare hands. They are uncomfortable, but liberating. The more I repeat this practice, the more I realize that it has a cumulative effect. Small, voluntary humiliations that, far from diminishing me, make me freer. The third step is to choose a short phrase, a verse that becomes the ember that sustains the flame throughout the day. It could be something like, "Create in me a pure heart," or "Your grace is sufficient for me." The key is to keep this phrase fresh in your mind, repeating it in moments when your patience is tested or when the urge to assert yourself begins to grow. This verse serves as a constant reminder that the fire that warms me does not come from me, but from God. It's also a way to align your mindset with the promises that have already been given, rather than being swayed by the impulse of circumstances. Over time, I realized that this ritual wasn't just a tool to keep me grounded, but a daily invitation to live with purpose. It reminds me that that dream wasn't just a defining experience, but a mission. Because if the embers represented God's grace, preserved beneath the ashes of my pride, then my part is to ensure that nothing can ever smother that fire again. This practice keeps me conscious, awake to the small choices that, together, build the person I'm becoming. And it's curious to realize that when I start the day with this ritual, the way I see situations changes. Disagreements lose some of their power, differing opinions don't feel like attacks, and even the weight of responsibilities seems lighter. It's not because the problems have disappeared, but because the inner flame is protected and nourished. And when this flame is alive, reactions are no longer dictated by pride and are guided by a more sensitive heart, more willing to listen before speaking, to serve before being served. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because transforming a dream into a mission is something that goes beyond the personal sphere. It's allowing this flame to illuminate and warm the paths of those who walk alongside us, impacting lives that may never know where the warmth they felt came from. Comment there. That makes sense to me. When I reflect on everything I've experienced since that night, the image of the embers remains as clear as when I first saw them in the dream. They weren't just a symbolic detail, they were a mirror of my own soul. The embers represented hidden grace, that spark that God preserves even when our choices and attitudes seem to have extinguished the heat. The ashes were my pride, accumulated over time, covering and smothering what could still burn. And the breath was humility, the only wind capable of dispelling the weight of those ashes and allowing life to pulse again. This revelation changed the way I view the spiritual journey. It's not about seeking a spectacular fire every day, but about ensuring that the embers never cease to exist. It's a silent, almost intimate process, but one that requires constant attention. Today, every decision I make carries the question, will this fan the embers or will it throw more ash on them? This simple reflection changed my mindset because it prevents me from acting on autopilot and reminds me that small choices shape great results. Transforming my dream into a personal mission was inevitable. I understood that it wasn't enough to interpret what I saw. I needed to live according to what I learned. And this mission begins with a question I asked myself and now want to ask you. Where do you need to breathe today? Perhaps it's in a conversation you've been avoiding, in a reconciliation that seems difficult, in an action that requires more listening than responding. It could be in an act of service that no one will notice, or in an apology that pride has always postponed. Breathing is choosing the narrowest path, but also the freest. This journey is not linear. There are days when the fire burns brightly, illuminating every step, and other days when it seems almost extinguished. But it is precisely in these moments of weakness that the breath of humility becomes most urgent. It is this breath that keeps the ember from dying. This is why we cannot treat spiritual experiences as isolated events. A dream like that does not come to be stored in a drawer of memories, but to become a starting point, a constant reminder that conversion is a daily process. And this is where the story opens up to something bigger. The vision of the coals isn't just about me or you. It's about a movement of continuous transformation that God provokes in our lives through different sign streams, visions, encounters, even unexpected, everyday situations. Over time, I realized that this wasn't the only time He spoke to me this way. Other images, other words, and other scenarios manifested, each one bringing a piece of the puzzle of my conversion. These revelations don't replace the Word, but deepen it, guiding steps I wouldn't have taken alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are other visions and dreams that carry this same call for ongoing conversion, each revealing different aspects of what it means to live with our hearts exposed to the breath of God. And it is these experiences that show that, even when we think everything has been said, He finds new ways to reach us. Comment there, breath of humility. If you've made it this far, I believe something from this message has found a place in your heart. And that's why I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. If this content helped you reflect, if it resonated with your spiritual life, subscribe to the channel so we can continue together on this journey of daily conversion and inner growth. And leave the phrase, "I'm with you," until the end in the comments, so I'll know you were there until the very end, and I'll be happy to interact with you there, if you want. Leave your like too. It's not just a button, it's a way to keep this flame burning and help this message reach more hearts that need it. And look, there's a video right here that complements exactly what we talked about today. Click and stay with me there, because I'm sure it will further strengthen this flame we've rekindled together now.